Hello. So this video is just to demonstrate how you might be able to work on multi-channel pieces while we're away from campus, using on headphones, using a binaural decoder and some ambisonics. So if you downloaded the folder that I provided, you'll see here that I've got some Reaper templates as well as some test files which we can use, both as examples and just to see that everything's working. So the first example is this ambisonic binaural template ambi only, and this just demonstrates very basically how to do this sort of work if you already have an ambisonic signal flow. So you can see here in Reaper, I've got a master track, and if I open up the routing on that, you can see I've got 24 channels, which is appropriate for the order that I'm working in, but you might be working in a different order of ambisonics. Under the effects, I've got here the IEM binaural decoder. We're using, in these examples, always using the IEM plugins, which are available for free. This one is very nice. So basically, instead of a normal ambisonic decoder, which might be targeting some loudspeaker array, this one converts the ambisonic signal to headphone signals using head-related transfer functions, so simulating those movements in space. And you can see here that we've got settings for the order. We've also got some equalization adjustments for common headphone models. I've got some really old headphones which aren't in here, so I'm not using them, but if you've got any of these headphones, it's probably worth trying. And basically, by simulating the kind of cues that we get from the shape of our ears, as well as reflections off of our shoulders, our body, things like this, and the different interaural differences, time differences, and level differences, this simulates what we get arriving at our ears to create the impression of movement in space. This is, of course, dependent on how close your ears and head match what was used for measuring to create this decoder. Some people it may work better than others. There may be other binaural decoders that you could look at using as well if this one doesn't work, but it works pretty well for me. Hopefully it works pretty well for you. So that's replacing my normal decoder. On the track here, I see I've got a directions test track, which is just an example track. And on there, I've just got the IEM stereo decoder, which if you've been working with ambisonics, you can see you've got azimuth, and elevation. I'm actually using it as a mono encoder, but this works fine for that as well. So azimuth is location in degrees around the horizon, and elevation is then direction in degrees above or below that point on the horizon, and it goes in that order. The other thing that's interesting here is this width value for stereo. So if you have a stereo input, you can control its stereo width and pan them together, but we're not using that today. And I've just got here a sample file, and I've automated the azimuth to make the sounds move around so that the directions correspond to what I'm saying in the file. It's a fairly sort of lo-fi recording I just did at home, but it sort of demonstrates it. If you're listening to this on headphones, which I recommend you do, then you should be able to hear the binaural signals. So let's have a listen now. Front, right, left, back, and now this should be doing a slow rotation around your head. Okay, so that seems to work. And if you wanted to work this kind of way, you could take this as a template, add more tracks with different encoders, and it's very typical workflow in ambisonics to have one encoder at the end of the signal chain, one decoder at the end of the signal chain. So everything's routed to that master bus where the decoding happens. And if you were working in this way and you wanted to go into the studio, you could just replace this decoder with an appropriate decoder that's configured for your loudspeaker setup. Similarly, if you already have a Reaper session which is working with an ambisonic signal chain, you could just replace your decoder with this binaural decoder at the end, assuming that the order and everything else matches. And there are some other resources on the Canvas page about configuration and ambisonic parameters like that. Okay, so that's a kind of basic, straightforward ambisonic signal chain. But a lot of you work in other formats, for instance, the French 8 format, which is an octagonal format. So here's an example of how you might set up or adapt a French 8's Reaper session for working on headphones. So basically, I'm going to pop this session open. Just takes a moment. And you can see here, I've got another example track, which is just, again, an 8-channel test signal. And that is configured as an 8-channel track, which routes to the master track. And the way that I'm making this work with the headphones is on the master track here, I've just got two plugins. I've got the IEM multi-encoder, and you can see here, this is the standard French 8 speaker layout and order. So I'm basically encoding these signals into these positions. I've set this to encode 8 signals, and I've configured the settings on here so that they match to the normal directions for these things. And then that feeds again into the same binaural decoder that we were working with in the last example. Again, everything here is set up for third order, but you could use a higher order if you want. You would need to adjust your the track channels on the master track if you wanted to do that to make sure that you had enough. Okay, so let's have a listen to that.
Front left, front right, wide right, side left, side right, rear left, rear right.
Okay, so that works for me. So if I wanted to adapt this, what I could do is, for example, just make another track here. Set that to 8 channels, because we want 8 channels. This to be an 8-channel track. So we're working in French 8 format. And then down here, I've got, say, an 8-channel sound file, which I can drop in on that track. I'm going to remove this track because I don't need it anymore. And this should be all routed into the master. And so if I just drop in here somewhere, here's now basically my 8-channel file, and it's being simulated on headphones by ambisonic encoding and then the binaural ambisonic decoder, which produces the headphone signal. Great. And you can do very similar things for other formats. So for here, I've got, for example, I've got another one, which is French 16, which is basically just 2 rings of 8. The first 8 channels are low ring around the horizon and then a higher ring. And I've done very much the same thing as on the last one. I've just got the 2 rings here. The first one is at 0 degrees elevation. The second one is at 32.2 degrees elevation. That might seem a little low or look a little low in the visualization there, but that's actually the elevation in the dome room at the University of Birmingham of the first ring up. So that's it just looks a little bit low because we're looking at the top of this dome kind of representation here rather than from within it. And again, we just encode those 16 channels and we plug them into the binaural decoder here. And if we listen to that,
left, front right, wide left,
we got
right,
a similar
side
test
left,
track.
side right, rear left, rear right.
Now we'll have the upper ring.
Upper level. Front left, front right, wide right, side left, side right, rear left, rear right.
Okay, and so again, if you wanted to adapt that to do your own work, I would just add a new track here. Let's make it 16 channels. I'll get rid of this track. Ideally, actually, I'd save these, of course, as a new session before I did this, so I still got my templates, but you can always download them again. And here I've got, again, a 16 channel piece in French order. Again, low then high. That's going to take a little while to do the peaks, but we can listen in the meantime. And we can hear that we're getting some sound there. Okay, and finally, I know that some of you are working in hybrid formats, so I've just got one final template here, which basically just demonstrates how you might configure something like that. And this really just combines all three of the last examples. And you can see here that I've got my ambisonic encoding track. The first one, I've got my 8-channel track, and I've got my 16-channel track. The only difference here really is that I've got the one binaural decoder on the master bus, on the master track, but then I put the encoders, rather than just having one encoder, as we did with the 8-channel and 16-channel ones. We maybe only needed one encoder for that, because if everything else was an 8-channel signal path, that could all just get summed and encoded at once. But here I've got, on this ambisonic signal that's going to be encoded, I've got the stereo encoder. On this track, I've got my 8-channel multi-encoder. And on this track, I've got my 16-channel multi-encoder. So basically, what this means is that each one of these tracks is producing a ambisonic encoded signal. I've made sure I've got my bus sizes all right. And that encoded signal gets summed and then sent to the master, where it's decoded. So if you've been working with ambisonics plus 8-channel, this would be one sort of way to do it. And we can see
Back.
that, yeah, this is working.
Now this should be doing a slow rotation. Front left, front right.
And the French 8 is working.
Wide right. Upper level. Front left, front
And this
right.
French 16 is working.
Wide left.
Okay. So if I was going to do this, actually, use this as a template, what I'd probably do is save it as something else. And then probably the easiest thing to do is have a parent track for each type of material that we have. So, for example, what I could do is, let's make an 8-channel track. I'll call this 8-channel parent. I need this to be 24 channels, because that's the number of channels I need for the order of ambisonics that I'm working in. I'm going to open the two effects windows here. And I'm going to put that over there. I'm going to keep this track as an example. So I move it down. And then I'm going to add a new track there. Which I will make the last one. So you can see all of these are coming into this 8-channel parent. So I've got the one encoder for all the 8-channel stuff. And if I go back to the other folder here, I can put my 8-channel piece in there as well. And I could solo that.
Side right, rear left, rear right.
And again, we could do a similar thing for all the different types of material we have. We could have a 16-channel parent track, which with an encoder, we could have a 5.1, we could have anything we want. As usual with doing these kind of hybrid things, there's a little bit of bookkeeping you have to do in Reaper, but I think that's pretty manageable. But the main thing is that we can get this into headphones so that you can at least do some of this kind of work and work on some of spatialization and stuff when you don't have access to a multi-channel studio. All right, thank you very much for watching this. Hopefully it's of use. Bye.